My name is Antony Froggatt, and I'm a Senior Research Fellow at Chatham House, focusing on energy and climate change. So I'd like to welcome you to this session on geopolitics, energy security, and climate change. I'd just like to remind you all that this discussion is on the record and is being recorded, so it will be available on demand later, the edited highlights, no doubt. If you're tweeting, please use the hashtag CHLondon. And I'm delighted to welcome today Dr Fatih Birol, who is a Turkish economist and an energy expert, and who has served as the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency since September 2015. He's probably one of the few leaders of an international organization that has started work as an analyst and then led their flagship publication, the World Energy Outlook, before eventually taking this top job. So Bronwyn, if you're in the room, there is an opportunity for us to rise up from analysts to running international organizations. During his time at the IEA, he has taken several steps at reforming the institution, to include strengthening ties with emerging economies from India and China, and I'm sure we'll hear today why that is really quite so fundamentally important. And has also broadened the scope of the Institute away from just fossil fuels into clean energy transitions. Again, things we'll touch upon today. As you'll see in his biopack, in the biopack, Dr. Birol has been awarded many accolades and awards inside and outside the world of energy, reflecting on the significance of both him and the International Energy Agency. So before I open up the floor to questions, I'd like to sort of abuse my position as the chair to throw a few, or raise a few myself. When we do come to questions, please, those in the room, just raise your hand and someone will come along with a mic. And those online, please do start firing away your questions, typing them in now, and we'll come to those and try and mix them into the questions from the room. So in terms of my first question, what we saw in the previous session was obviously the fundamental impact of the war in Ukraine. But it isn't just in the region, it has a global ramification, and in particular in the energy sector. And we've seen a mixed response. In some countries, maybe particularly the EU and its member states, we've seen greater improvements in terms of energy saving, some of it deliberate, some of it as a consequence of too higher prices, but also really quite ambitious or further ambition in terms of renewable energy and sort of the move away from the use of fossil fuels. However, that isn't universal. And what we've seen in other countries and companies is higher energy prices, increased concerns about security of supply have led to acceleration of plans to exploit fossil fuel resources. So it just seems to be what's your view? Have we seen the last year an acceleration of the energy transition, or as many companies are suggesting a slowing down?
Thanks a lot, first of all, for the invitation. So, 24th of February was the start, in my view, of the first global energy crisis. We had different energy crises in the past, in the 70s and 80s, mainly on oil, but this was the oil, natural gas, coal, electricity, huge. The reason is very simple. As of 24th of February, Russia, the country that invaded Ukraine, was the #1 oil exporter of the world, #1 natural gas exporter of the world, major player in the coal markets and critical minerals. We are not talking about any country, but a superpower in terms of energy. So the responses to Russia's aggression and Russia's steps meant we are in the middle of the first global energy crisis. And afterwards, a discussion started. Whether or not this global energy crisis will slow down or accelerate the clean energy transitions. Only a few days after the crisis, we made a statement and we said, we believe this crisis will accelerate the clean energy transitions. And today, when I look at the numbers, it is a job we have at the IEA. We are very fortunate to have every single energy and climate data at our fingertips. When we look at the numbers, very obvious. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a turbocharger for clean energy transitions around the world. Why? Very simple. Before the invasion, the main driver for clean energy transitions was environmental concerns. Now, in addition to that, many governments around the world, not only in Europe, but also in Asia and elsewhere, understood that the lasting solutions to their energy security challenges go through increasing the share of clean energy at home and reducing the reliance in other countries. So as such, when we look at the numbers, we have never seen the growth in clean energy so strong. In terms of solar power, in 1 year, solar power capacity additions was about 40% what we have done in the last 30 years. Whatever we built in the last 30 years, 40% of it we built in 1 year. Electric cars, huge growth. And the important point for the oil companies, I'll give you one number. 2 years ago, 1 out of 25 cars sold in the world was electric car. 1 out of 25 2 years ago. This year, it will be 1 out of 5 cars sold is electric car. Huge growth. Buses are following. Heat pumps, big growth in Europe, United States, elsewhere. Efficiency improvements have doubled. So when I look at all of them, and one more thing I should say, I shouldn't forget, this is very important, we see the nuclear power is making a comeback. In terms of some countries were iffy whether they will increase the lifetime, extend the lifetime of nuclear power plants to new builds. Nuclear is making a comeback. So when I put all of them together, now, unlike before, we have at least 2 plus 1, I will come to that, drivers for clean energy transitions. Number 1, energy security. Number 2, environmental climate reasons. And number 3, so this is the point that maybe passed to some of the discussions. Many countries see what International Energy Agency has said 2 years ago in terms of the industry, manufacturing. Clean energy manufacturing is the next chapter of the industry. Batteries, solar panels, windmills, hydrogen electrolyzers, and now there is one country which is dominating the game big time, China, and countries see that they can build electric cars, or they can use electric cars, they can build solar panels, but their reliance in terms of manufacturing in one country is increasing. Therefore, countries are now giving subsidies, incentives, in order to increase their domestic clean energy technology manufacturing. This ranges from United States to India, from India to Europe. So, to sum up, clean energy technologies, clean energy is moving fast, faster than many people realize, for energy security, climate change, and industrial policy reasons.
Great. I'm sure some people will pick up on some of those points, but just if I could follow up on the industrial strategy question, because, yeah, very clearly, we've seen the US Inflation Reduction Act, as you mentioned, Europe, India, etc. their primary concern is domestic, isn't it? Is building up domestic industries in order to create jobs, in order to reduce overseas dependency on overseas supply chains. Are we moving away from cooperation to a more competitive global market in these areas? I mean, some people have described this as a new, energy as a new weapon, being used in the same way that it was in the 1970s. So do you fear this as a development?
First of all, energy is not a new but an old weapon. So people use it since many, many centuries. But first of all, IRA, in my view, when I look at the numbers, I think Inflation Reduction Act is the single most important climate action since Paris Agreement 2015. When I look at the implications, what will happen there. Having said that, I understand the sensitivities of many countries in Europe, Japan, India, where they say that it will have implications for their own domestic industry development. That's true. So I know and I appreciate that there are discussions with the Americans, Indians, Prime Minister Modi and Biden summit. It was one of the main topics. Again, Europe, United States discussions. I hope that there will be flexibilities and cross-fertilization in terms of the clean energy technology industry development around the world between the US, Europe, India, China, all the other countries. Now, the problem is the following. The climate change is such an issue, with this definition, that even in Europe, for example, as of tomorrow, we bring the emissions to zero. Europe will not be immune to the impact of climate change if the other countries go what they are doing now. Because 1 ton of carbon dioxide going to atmosphere from Liverpool or from Jakarta or from Detroit or Johannesburg, it has the same effect on the people in the UK. It doesn't change. Emissions don't have a passport. So even from a selfishness point of view, we have to see that the emissions are going down around the world, not only in our wherever we live in. Therefore, the magic word is international cooperation. But as somebody who discusses with many government leaders, many organizations, travel a lot, it is going through one of the most difficult and fragile times, international cooperation, where we need it the most. So I think this is the key challenge we are facing today when it comes to climate change and other issues.
Great. Maybe just one final quick question from me, and then I'm genuinely going to open it up. Just to pick up on that, the climate change cooperation. We have COP28 this year in UAE. Many issues hanging, as always, they hang over from the previous COPs, loss and damage being one important one, but also we have this year the global stocktake. So what would you come away happy in terms of in December in COP? What do you think is achievable?
So what I would like to see and what it reasonably we can expect, there is a big decalage, the big difference between those two. But there are some, in my view, there are some musts we must get from there. First, commitment of the countries in terms of expansion of renewable energies, according to our numbers. And our focus should be on 2030, in my view. Of course, 2050 as well, 2030 should be focused. Between now and 2030, we would like to see renewable capacity expansions increase by a factor of 3 and the efficiency improvement factor of 2. So this should be embedded. Second, I would like to see that the countries come up with a clear position in terms of the decline of use of fossil fuels. Number 3, I think oil and gas companies need to make commitments in order to be able to get a social license from around the world. And number 4, and which is for me the fault line of our fight against climate change, measures, commitments for acceleration, clean energy finance in emerging and developing world. So these are rough top 4 demands I have in mind to be able to say that we had a successful COP28.
That's very clear. Thank you very much. So, opening up the floor, questions. We have 3 quick ones here. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, if we can do that, and then I'll come to you next round. And please do join me. I don't have any online. I don't know if they're coming through or the screens. But yeah, and if we can keep the questions really short, then we can then get more. That would be great.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Prosper Jiche. I'm a Shibini scholar. I wanted to know where we can build a bridge between transitioning from, let's say, petrol and diesel cars to electric vehicles and the issue of affordability. How do we ensure that people are able to afford, even as we work towards transitioning to efficiency in terms of energy?
Thank you. The lady there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fatih. I'm Zumrud, Leadership Masterclass Program at Chatham House. My question was in regards to energy solidarity, and I wanted you to comment on that and on the case of Nord Stream and its effects, and potentially how China and India are exploiting Russian gas at the moment. Thank you.
And then the gentleman here, and then we'll, if you could answer those, yeah.
Thanks very much, Dr. Fatah. Adel Hamazi, Highbridge and Chatham House. First, very easy question, just your thoughts on the durability of OPEC Plus going into US election year, particularly around Russia not maybe carrying its weight, so to speak. And the second, your views on where flaring and flare reduction is in the coming years. When you look at the numbers in MENA particularly, there's BCM that amounts to even the 3rd largest gas exporter, Algeria. I'll ask you about Nigerian subsidies bilaterally.
Thank you. So 3 quite diverse questions for you.
Okay. Let me start maybe with the second question, because it requires a bit of a global answer. Nord Stream. Now, we talk about the Ukraine invasion of Ukraine by Russia implications. So if you look at a bit with the bigger picture and a bit the history, I think in my view, Europe, including UK, the entire Europe, made 3 historically strategic mistakes in terms of energy, which had implications for the foreign policy of Europe. What are these 3 major, in my view, strategic mistakes of Europe? One of them is natural gas. You cannot have an over-reliance on one strategic good on one country, so big terms. Okay, as of 2019, just a few years before the invasion, Europe's reliance on Russian gas was about 50%. This is completely wrong. You cannot rely on any country, even it is the most innocent country in the world, most friendly country in the world. You cannot rely on one single country. It's the Nord Stream, this stream, whatever. This is a big mistake, strategic mistake, which has huge consequences, as we have seen, and as we have warned several times the many European governments. This is the mistake number 1. Mistake number 2, Europe had a decent generation of electricity from nuclear power. Until recently, the share went around 30%, but in the last 2 decades, we didn't do anything in terms of nuclear power, and it now is declining slowly to 15%, because we turn our shoulder back to nuclear power and just left it, and the other countries, China, Russia, building nuclear power one after another, and we didn't do much in Europe. This is the second mistake. Third mistake is also huge, in my view. Solar. Today, when you look at last year, of all the power plants built in the world, 60% was solar only. And as I mentioned, solar is today dominated by China, big time, big time. But 20 years ago, it was Europe who started the solar. Germany, Italy, Spain, this country, they put a lot of subsidies, started the solar, and 20 years ago, Europe had 70% share in the solar manufacturing in the world. But after a while, Europe dropped the ball, China took it over, and today China is the leader. In terms of energy technologies, it is like running a marathon. If you run the first 10 kilometers, as Europe did, as they lead the first 10 kilometers, nobody gives you a medal. You give the medal, get the medal if you finish 42 kilometers at the end. But Europe started well, but didn't finish. So these three mistakes, strategic mistakes, the over-reliance on one single country for natural gas, turning back to nuclear power, and solar, the mistake on solar, missing the train, has a lot of foreign policy implications and industrial policy for Europe. To answer the first question in terms of the Nord Stream. Coming back to the second thing, the transition in developing countries or different countries. I cannot put the transition issue in, I don't know, in France or in Germany or in UK with Africa. There are big differences there. And today in Africa, the key question is access to energy, access to electricity. In sub-Saharan Africa today, every second person doesn't have electricity. Can you believe this? I mean, this is really an incredible issue. And to make it much more drastic, I give you one number. Think of the map, the sub-Saharan Africa. 60% of the global solar radiation comes to sub-Saharan Africa. Solar in the world and everywhere, the cheapest source of electricity generation. Every second person doesn't have electricity in sub-Saharan Africa, yet amount of solar electricity we generate in sub-Saharan Africa is less than solar electricity we generate in Netherlands. Think about the map. How big is Netherlands? How big is the sub-Saharan Africa? How sunny is Netherlands? How sunny is sub-Saharan Africa? So there is a big issue there, and we have to be very careful to support the countries in the developing world to get them through the clean energy transition. And if we are, as the UK, as the Western world, if we are prescriptive with those countries, use this, don't use that energy source, it may well create geopolitical fault lines between the Western countries and Africa, which are already there, or developing countries, which is fertile ground for some other countries to make use of. OPEC Plus, of course, it is up to those countries to take decisions what they are doing, but I believe it is in everybody's interest not to have high energy prices when the global economy is still fragile, and many, more than 50 developing countries, energy importing developing countries, are facing major debt crisis. So therefore, it is important for everybody to take responsible steps here. Of course, you mentioned the United States, but before the United States, I am thinking of more India, Africa, and the Asian countries who import a lot of oil, and the import bill is very important for those countries' economies and economic growth. And as I said, more than 50 countries today are facing a major debt crisis. I'll stop here.
Great, thank you. So, this always happens. Take this middle segment. Very quick questions. There's a few more online, and I'm going to fire them all at you, and then you have to pick and choose because we've got 4 minutes.
Sure. Ozan Özkural, managing partner of Tantu Capital Partners, active in the energy transition financing and carbon credit space. Dr. Birol, what is your thought around the possible conversion, or convergence rather, of the compliance and the voluntary part of the carbon credit space at some stage? And your thoughts around the price of carbon as a tool through which to encourage fuel switching. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman at the front, and then the one behind you, and then, I'm sorry for the others. Very quickly.
Thank you. My name is Yaroslav, University College London, and the program at Chatham House. I think there is a lot of discussion around solar, around electricity decarbonization. However, there is still a heating sector, and there is still part of the world depending on that in Northern Hemisphere, both OECD, but also developing countries like Eastern Europe, China, etc. Given strong technology path dependency and demand-side work with the heating sector, which is quite different to supply-side perspective in electricity, what are your views on transition in the heating sector, as well as do you see any role for any transition fuels?
Thank you. And then finally there. Just...
Badi Kocha, Intesa Sanpaolo. Dr. Birol, I'll try to be very quick. The 100 billion was to be given to the developing countries, not delivered. The private sector is supposed to be the panacea that can solve providing investment into renewable energy, particularly into places like Sub-Saharan Africa. However, that's contingent on state-owned enterprises buying that electricity. They're in bad shape. The countries that own those companies are in bad shape and debt distress. So how do we get out of this conundrum? Because this is what I don't see ever getting really addressed. We all say it's a panacea, but we don't solve the problem of the debt that would allow the panacea to occur.
Thank you. And just before you answer, just a question on hydrogen. I don't know if, again, maybe people can discuss these over tea. Your perspective on hydrogen.
Or coffee.
Tea or coffee, yeah. Herb tea, sorry. And then finally, a finance question on adaptation. How does the world invest in the necessary mitigation while also helping to prepare for the obviously inevitable impacts of climate change?
So there are 5 questions as far as how many minutes?
1.5, but I think if we do 2.5, people won't object.
Okay, so let me start with a bit of a oil companies, because there was and the energy companies' responsibility here. And also link it to your COP28. Now, the international oil companies, there's a lot of scrutiny on the international oil companies and what they need to do. This is good, in my view. But I have to tell you something. International oil companies that we read every day in the newspapers and discussions in the televisions, they produce only 15% of the oil. 85% is produced by the national oil companies in Middle East, in Africa, in Asia, and so on. So I don't say that there shouldn't be a scrutiny on the international oil companies, but if our issue is the emissions, we should look at the entire oil and gas industry. And when we listen to the speeches of the leaders of the oil and gas companies, maybe 60–70% of their speeches or company statements or strategies based on how much they care about the clean energy, their plans and strategies, 60–70%. But when you look at their investment portfolio, which we did, only less than 4% goes to clean energy, 96% goes to their traditional fuels. And I have no problem if a company says, oil company, I don't care, I am going to increase my production by 4 million barrels per day. No problem. Why I don't have a problem? Because it's a company is built to make money, and they think they will make money like that. But I have a problem if they say, I am going to increase my production 4 million barrels per day, and my company is in line with the international climate targets. This cannot work, both of them. They have to choose one of them. So this is where I want to put the oil companies, and I hope hope that those companies, as you mentioned in the beginning in the COP28 discussion, make some commitments in COP28 taking place in a major oil-producing country, that they are able to get a social license. Carbon pricing, if we have time, in terms of carbon pricing, a very effective tool from a theoretical point of view, in some cases practical point of view, but in order to have a real global emission reductions, it should be a part of, or the parties should be more than one country, one sector. It should be much more global, and there should be a deal for putting the many countries together. And today, in the realpolitik terms, it seems to be very, very challenging. In terms of the maybe last thing about hydrogen, in the energy world, everybody loves hydrogen, which is scary because you never see in any technology, there are always differences. Everybody loves hydrogen, but the issue is, I believe there are very high expectations. To make it very short, I don't expect the hydrogen will be a big part of our energy mix today, not tomorrow, maybe the day after tomorrow. So we should be, in my view, our strategy should be, in the next 10 years or so, push the massive expansion of the technologies which are already with us, solar, wind, electric cars, nuclear power, efficiency, but at the same time push the hydrogen and other technologies to make them affordable in terms of costs. But don't expect big miracles from hydrogen to fix the problems we have today.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry we've run out of time. There's many more questions online and in the room. Just before we wrap up, I'll just remind you, you've got 28 minutes to have your tea and coffee. And then there is, there are a series of breakouts on AI and the threat or benefit for governments, and on do sanctions work upstairs. And there's also an ideas marketplace that Bronwyn mentioned at the beginning, starting at 12 o'clock. Are there limits to climate activism? So please, lots of opportunities to engage. I'd like to thank Dr. Birol for a great series of answering so many questions, raising so many points. For me, I very much took out of it your four sort of benchmarks for COP28, and I very much hope that these are met. So if we could give everyone a round of applause. Thank you.